Flight 369. This is Captain Ron Hensfield, Flight 369 to Boston. Copy. This is Tower 12 Operator 20052. Captain Hensfield was concentrating on his control panel. We seemed to have flown into an electrical storm, requesting an immediate emergency landing. Copy that. Stand by for approval. Captain Hensfield was white-knuckled as he held the flight controls for his passenger plane. Lightning struck through darkened clouds as the plane cut through the night sky. The flashes of light lit up his face that revealed a tightened stress that seemed to be building. Co-pilot James Tandon tapped the control gauge for the plane's power supply. Captain, the power supply is acting a little wonky. We aren't going to lose power, are we? Sweat was beading up on Hensfield's face. That's what I'm afraid of, Captain Hensfield said as he jerked his controls side to side. A loud, beeping alarm rang out in the cabin. Shit, Hensfield blurted out. We're losing altitude, Captain. I know. The plane began to descend rapidly. Captain Hensfield kept his eyes on the path ahead and his hands locked on the controls. Prepare for a crash landing. Alert the crew. Yes, Captain. James pressed the emergency button. The plane fast approached ground level at a rapid pace. Rain began to pound against the windows once they hit 3,000 feet. Thunder and lightning crashed and bolted through the sky. Damn it, visibility is shit. Captain Hensfield pulled up on the controls as the plane about to make contact the ground. Captain Hensfield opened his eyes and found himself in a strange, familiar place. Ronnie, your breakfast is ready. Mom? Ron whispered to himself. He suddenly realized he was in his bedroom, the bedroom he once had when he was 17 years old. He popped up out of bed and took a look at himself in the mirror. What the? He touched his young, youthful face. Wait a minute, the plane? I'm not going to tell you again, Ronnie. Yes, Mom, Ron shouted back. Ron heard footsteps marching toward his room, and she popped her head around the doorframe. Ronnie, hurry and get dressed. You'll be late. You just have 2 weeks left of school. Sorry, Mom, Ronnie said with astonishment. He was moved deeply to see his mother so young and alive. She had passed a few years ago, and he still felt the agonizing pain of losing her. Mom, he whispered. He and his mom had grown distant in the years prior to her death. Being a single mother wasn't easy, and it wasn't easy being an only child either. As a kid, Ron did everything his mother asked. She always had this empty happiness after his dad died. Ron could see it in her eyes every time she looked at him. Ron was the spitting image of his dad, and he knew she saw his face every time she looked at him. Ron found his clothes where he remembered 30 years earlier. He slid his hand on that familiar dresser that he had called his own for the entire duration of his childhood. He thought of his ex-wife Janie when she made him put the dresser drawer outside on the curb for the trash man because it didn't look shabby chic enough for her. Ron loved that dresser. His dad used to pick him up and put him on top of it to tie his shoes. Janie is such a bitch, Ron muttered. What was that? Ron's mom asked as she quick-stepped past his bedroom door. I've got an itch. Where? Ron's mom bolted into the room with concern on her face. Oh, it was my hand, Ron replied. Let me see. Ron stared at his mom's familiar face, and it warmed his heart. It seems to be fine. I don't see any bumps. Ron just smiled. I know you're all grown up now, but I don't ever want to stop taking care of you. You'll always be my little boy. I know, Mom. Thanks. Ron's mom was true to her word. She took care of him wherever he was in life. She even advised to not marry Janie. When she died in the hospital, she cried at the thought of leaving her baby boy behind. Even through her cancer treatments, she cared more about Ron than herself, despite Ron's drifting away due to Janie. Ron went downstairs, and breakfast was on the table. He gawked at the small, familiar detail of the kitchen. He had a moment of nostalgia when he saw his height chart marked with different colored markers. He saw the first one when he was 6 months old, to the last one, which was marked with the number 17. A tear welled up in Ron's eye, and he rubbed it out. "You've got to go. You'll be late," Ron's mom said. "Be home at 5 for dinner. I love you." "Okay, Mom. I'll be here. I love you too." Ron watched his mom exit through the front door. She stopped at the porch steps and looked back. She thanked God silently. At that moment, those words, "I love you," from her son, meant the world. "There she goes off to work," Ron said, "and I am not going to school." Ron grabbed the keys to the old Ford truck that used to be his dad's. He hopped in it, and the smell tore at his heart. The familiarity was hard to choke down. It always smelled like his dad's cologne. Before starting the truck, he looked around the old neighborhood. "Am I dead?" Ron whispered. "I must have crashed that plane, and now I'm dead." That sudden realization frightened Ron for a split second. At least I didn't go to hell. If I was in hell, Janie would be here. Ron smiled as he started the truck. It could be a lot worse. Ron relished at the idea that this was his new reality. He felt a certain calm as he drove through his childhood town of Hope's End. Suddenly, flashes of light pounded his brain and eyesight. He saw images of a black crow pecking at a dead corpse. The face of the dead body was blurry and distorted. He pulled over to the side of the road and slammed on the brakes. Ron winced, grabbing the sides of his head. He looked up at the rearview mirror, and he saw his younger 17-year-old face contort and morph like it was made of rubber. "What's happening?" he shouted. A police siren blipped consecutively from behind his truck. He saw a car and a shadowy silhouette of someone walking toward his truck. He grabbed his head at the jarring pain that shot through his temples to his forehead. There was a knock on the driver's side window, which instantly brought him back to coherence. "Ronnie, are you okay?" a woman's voice asked. Ron looked beyond the steel frame of his truck, and he saw a pleasant smile behind a set of Wayfarer sunglasses. "Yeah, that's me," Ron said reluctantly. "Ronnie, what's wrong with you?" What do you mean?" "Why are you acting like you don't know me?" "Shit, I know you." Ron tried to play it off to avoid an uncomfortable conversation. "Well, you're acting weird. I was just checking to see if you needed some help." "Actually, I'm fine. I just had a little headache. I thought I was having a stroke or something." "Yeah, I doubt that. There aren't too many 23-year-olds that have strokes." "What do you mean?" Ron asked. "You're pretty young, you know." Ron looked at himself in the rearview mirror, and sure enough, he was older than his 17-year-old self. The stubble on his face was the dead giveaway. Ron didn't start growing facial hair until he was over 20, and it came on strong at the age of 22. He suddenly realized who he was talking to. "Samantha," Ron sang out. "Yeah. Are you fucking with me, Ronnie?" "No. No way. Especially when you're carrying a gun," Ron said with a devilish grin. "That's right." Samantha grabbed her sidearm, still holstered. "I'm off at 7, so don't be late, okay? Are you sure you're okay? Need an ambulance?" "Funny," Ron blurted out. "I'm fine." "Don't be late." "Okay," Ron said curiously. Ron watched Samantha walk back to her police cruiser and get in. She drove away passing Ron and gave him the gun hand gesture. Ron smiled. "What is happening?" Ron sat up straight in the driver's seat and restarted his truck. He looked around and noticed that the buildings and signs were different from just moments ago. Time had passed, and he was now officially 23. He turned his truck around and went back home. The front of the house had changed from the short time that Ron had made his departure earlier. He remembered when his mom hired a landscaping company to come out and redesign the front yard. He was 23 when she did that, and remembered it well because his mom gave him an expensive watch for his birthday. Ron looked at his wrist, and he was wearing it. The yard still had that new landscape look. Ron could almost see the square pattern of the grass sod rolls, and the bark chips in the planter were still a deep, wet brown. It was a curious thing as his memories became clearer. He didn't recognize the car in the driveway. It was a black Mustang with tinted windows. Ron parked his truck curbside directly behind his S-gray sedan. He could smell the cedar and fresh fertilizer the moment he stopped his truck. They must have just landscaped the yard, Ron thought. He overlooked the yard as he walked up to the front door. "What is going on?" he whispered. As he went to grab the doorknob, the door swung open. "Ronnie, I thought you were at work." "Hey, Mom." Ron's mom smiled. "I was heading out to go golfing." "When did you start golfing?" Ron asked. "Travis, let's go. Me and Travis go golfing every Friday. You know that. Are you okay?" A strong-looking man walked out of the living with a pair of aviator sunglasses on. He looked to be about 50 years old. He was in great shape and had swooping straight gray hair like an aged actor. "Hey, Ronnie, how's it going?" Ron stood still in confusion. "Hey, just to let you know, I didn't forget the conversation we had last Saturday. I heard what you said, and you're 100% correct. So, I just wanted to say thank you." Travis grabbed the sides of Ron's shoulders and smiled. Ron could smell his cologne, and it smelled expensive. "We'll be back in a few hours, okay, honey?" "Sure, Mom. I'll be seeing you later." Ron's mom and Travis started walking toward the Mustang. "Hey, Mom," Ron shouted. "Yes, honey." "I'm going to go out with Samantha later." "That's great, honey. I just love her." That surprised Ron immensely due to the fact he had never introduced Samantha to her. Samantha was just a high school fling at best. That was back when I had a life as a pilot, before I crashed the plane. Ron felt nervousness well up in the pit of his stomach. "Shit." As a matter of fact, he blurted out into the silence of his childhood home. "I would have met Janie by this time. This is getting very strange." Ron went to the kitchen and started taking out all the necessary condiments to make a ham sandwich. He looked around the house as he slathered mustard on the white bread slices. He couldn't believe that he was in his childhood home making a ham sandwich. It felt good to be transported into the body of an unused 23-year-old. He sat down on the couch and ate his sandwich in utter amazement. Ron's eyes began to feel tired and drowsy. He leaned back on the familiar couch and closed his eyes. Ron opened his eyes, which felt like seconds. He stood up quickly and looked at the clock on the side table. 6 o'clock already? He said. Time to go get Samantha. Ron grabbed his truck keys and headed out of the door. Travis and his mom weren't home yet, and for some strange reason, it felt right. Ron knew Travis was his mom's boyfriend. He loved his dad, but his mom never looked that happy. Not a single day after his dad had passed away. She never did smile like that. Ron pulled into the police station, and Samantha was standing just outside the entrance door with her civilian clothes on. She smiled and waved. Ron pulled up to the side of her and stopped. She hopped into the truck like she had hopped up into it 100 times. "How's it going?" She smiled while simultaneously leaning over to give Ron a kiss. Ron just went with it. He felt butterflies flutter through his chest. "All right," Samantha said. "You know the place." Ron stared at Samantha. This wasn't the same girl he had dismissed so easily so many years ago. She felt like his soulmate. Ron never felt like this about Janie, the woman he ended up marrying and ruined his life. Samantha felt like home, and it felt right. "Come on, let's go," Samantha said with a smile. "Where are we going again?" Ron asked timidly. "The county fair, silly. Remember we just talked about it?" "Oh yeah," Ron said in agreement. Might as well go with the flow, he thought. Ron drove out of the parking lot of the police station and headed straight to the Hope's End County Fair, just on the other side of Main Street. "Okay, so we have to ride the Ferris wheel and get a cinnamon roll. You know it's our tradition." "Oh yeah," Ron once again agreed. He hadn't a clue about what Samantha was talking about, and he didn't care. He just waited on every word. She spoke as if it was from an angel from above. The Ferris wheel was huge for a county fair, and Ron was a tinge bit afraid of heights. Their compartment stopped at the apex of the wheel. Samantha went in for another kiss. "Isn't this amazing?" she said wildly. "It is," Ron replied. "You can literally see the entire town from up here." Samantha's face was lit up with the neon glow of the lights on the edges of the compartment. "It's beautiful," Ron answered, "just like you." Samantha smiled, and this time Ron leaned in for a kiss. The cinnamon rolls were fresh and hot. The gooey glaze and soft dough melted in their mouths. Ron had forgotten about being a pilot in his previous life. He felt happy for the first time in a long time. He grabbed the center of the cinnamon roll and shoved it in his mouth. He smiled at Samantha, and she smiled back. He suddenly felt a bludgeoning rail across the back of his head. He collapsed to the ground without warning. His vision was blurred, and he saw two figures attack Samantha. There were 3 gunshots that rang out and a faint chatter of people screaming. He rolled over in a daze and rolled back in search of Samantha. "Sam," he whispered. A vision of a blurry Samantha walked up to Ron and crouched over him. The sound of the bells and whistles of the fair faded against her silhouette. "Ron, are you okay?" she asked. "Ron?" Ron's vision pinned to darkness. Ron woke up in a hospital bed. He looked around the room in a stupor. His eyes ached with a deep-seated throbbing. The door opened, and in walked Samantha, followed by a cute little girl who was yelling, "Daddy, daddy, daddy." The little girl had semi-curly brown hair and an exuberant smile. Ron was gathering his thoughts as the little girl pounced against the bed rail. "How are you feeling?" Samantha asked. Ron tried to speak, but only uttered a dry whisper. "Wait, let me get you some water. You're probably thirsty." Samantha poured water from a small pitcher into a paper cup and handed it to Ron. He mouthed the words, "Thank you," and drank the water. "I feel like shit. What happened?" Ron asked. Samantha unclasped the bed rail and dropped it at the side of the bed. She sat down softly. "You're still trying to wake up, huh?" She grabbed Ron's hand. The little girl jumped up and gave Ron a hug. "You just got out of surgery," Samantha said quietly. "The hit to the back of the head?" he asked. "No, you just got out of surgery." "For what?" "A tumor." A tumor?" Ron whispered loudly. "You know, just relax, I'll get the doctor." Ron's vision began to clear up, and he noticed that Samantha looked much older than she looked when they were on the Ferris's wheel just moments ago. It happened again, he thought. How old am I now? Samantha walked in with the doctor. "Hey there, son. Feeling a little disoriented?" the doctor asked. Yeah, I think so. Here, lay your head back, the doctor said as he pulled out his tiny flashlight. The doctor pointed the light into Ron's eyes. Everything looks great. You're probably having a memory adjustment episode. Just relax, okay, Ronnie. Let your sensory take everything in. There is a lot of brain function stimulus going on. Just let it catch up. Ron shook his head in agreement. The doctor smiled. The surgery was a success. I will get your exit paperwork ready. Thank you, doctor, Samantha said as the doctor left the room. I brought you some clothes, and Abigail drew you a picture last night. Go ahead and show it to Daddy. Daddy? Abigail, Ron thought. Ron never had the chance to have any kids. Janie loathed the idea of kids running around making messes in her house. Ron tried to nag Janie about it, but eventually gave up. Abigail pulled a piece of paper out of her pocket and displayed it to Ron with her childish charm. It was a picture of Ron, Samantha, and Abigail at home playing cards. They were sitting at a small table with smiles on their faces, and it was all in crayon. It's really good. Thank you, sweetie, Ron said lowly. Come, let's get you out of bed and back at home. The ride home was peculiar for Ron. He didn't recognize the car, and Hope's End looked about the same beside a few new small business. Nothing too imposing on the charm of Hope's End. They drove down Sam Hill Street, and Ron saw his truck parked in the driveway of a house toward the end of the street. My truck is still here? He said. Yeah, of course, Samantha replied. We love that truck. Where would it go? Yeah, I don't. I guess I'm still confused. Just give it some time, and everything will be back to normal. I'm not too sure I want it to, Ron said politely. Ron, Samantha, and Abigail walked into the house. Ron looked around and saw a collage of family pictures on the wall next to the banister. Pictures of him, Samantha, and Abigail in all kinds of different scenarios. The park, snow, and the beach, and all with this air of a loving, happy family. Ron smiled and felt sad. But I don't remember any of this, he whispered. Come on, let's eat. I made a lasagna earlier. Samantha grabbed Ron by the arm and led him to the kitchen. Abigail followed close behind and helped Ron with his chair. Samantha served up the lasagna, and they all ate, with little to no word said. Samantha broke the silence. Feel good to be home? She asked. Yes, it does. I'm really glad to be home. This lasagna is great, by the way. I know that's silly. It's your favorite. That was news to Ron, since he had only tried lasagna once in his life, and he hated it. I'm serious, Sam. It is very good. You act like this is the first time I've made it. You have no idea, Ron thought. You go ahead and finish. I'm going to get Abigail into bed. Say goodnight. Good night, Daddy. I love you, Abigail said as she ran over to Ron and gave him a huge hug. I'll be back in a minute, Samantha said with a straight smile. Ron watched the two of them leave and walk upstairs. Ron looked up the ceiling. God, if you're real, this is not fair. Why are you doing this to me? Ron grabbed his head. I don't understand what is happening. What is real? Was I a pilot? Did I crash that plane into the ground? My mom, where is she? How old am I? Ron's heart began to race. I'm losing my mind. He was starting to lose his grip on reality. What was real? What was reality anyway? Samantha walked down the stairs and back into the dining room. I'll clear the table, Samantha said. She started to grab a plate when Ron suddenly stood up. He grabbed Samantha by her arms. Sam, he said firmly as he gave her a kiss. Are you real? Samantha smiled and bit her lip. Her smile faded as she gazed into Ron's eyes. "How real do you want me to be?" she asked. "Are you real?" he demanded. "This whole life around me, my existence with you and me, is it real?" "Why wouldn't it be?" Samantha replied calmly. Ron relaxed his arms and gave into the oxygen that wanted to relieve his lungs. "I'm sorry," Ron said as he sat back down in his chair. "Don't you dare be sorry," Sam said. She sank her fingers into Ron's hair and nestled his head to her bosom. "You just relax and go upstairs. You've been through a lot." Ron welcomed Samantha's suggestion and stood up. "Thank you." "Thank you for what?" Samantha asked. "All this," Ron replied with his arms stretched out. "All this, Ron, is all us," Samantha said. Ron smiled and headed for the stairs. He stopped at the landing and looked back to watch Samantha grab a stack of dishes and exit into the kitchen. Ron had never felt such a longing of love before. He loved her to his deepest part of his core, and he wasn't exactly sure about why that was. Somehow, someway, he loved Samantha and had a daughter with her. The elephant in the room was obvious. Why was this happening? Ron shrugged off the idea that he was in a heavenly realm of some kind. After all, the last thing he remembered from his past life was going down in a plane. He shrugged off the idea that he was in hell. He wouldn't be feeling so much love. He walked into the master bedroom and looked at the king-sized bed that was nestled at the far end of the room under a large pentagon-shaped window. Nothing in the room was familiar. He felt like a stranger in a place where he shouldn't be. He was tired of thinking, tired of reaching into the deepest recesses of his mind. He walked up to the bed and dropped to the mattress face down. His eyes were heavy as drowsiness took hold of his thoughts and his eyelids. He involuntarily closed his eyes shut and fell asleep. He feared that he might wake up in a different place as everything faded to black. "Wake up, sleepyhead," Samantha sang out. Ron opened his eyes to Samantha holding a cup of coffee. His eyes felt swollen and his neck felt bent and achy. "What time is it?" Ron asked. "It's 9 o'clock. I thought I'd let you sleep in a little," Samantha said with a smile. "Here's some coffee for you. Coffee Corral Extreme," she sang out. "Hey, by the way, we need to be out of here by 11. "What's going on?" Ron asked. "Abigail's graduation. It's not every day your only child graduates from college." Ron's heart went from 0 to 60. He stood up out of bed in a panic. The sun was shining brightly through the window. He looked around the room, and it was completely different. He ran to the bathroom and looked at himself in the mirror. "Holy shit, I'm the age I was when I went down in the plane," he said loudly. "What was that, honey?" Samantha asked from the vantage point of the bedroom. "Oh, nothing," Ron blurted out. Samantha walked into the bathroom. "It sounded like you said something about a plane." No, Ron insisted. "Because the tickets are right there on my vanity." Ron waited patiently for Samantha to leave the bathroom. He lingered for a moment and waited for her to leave the bedroom. He walked quickly over to the vanity and grabbed the plane tickets. He pulled them out of the envelope and looked at the flight. Flight 369 Boston. "Holy shit, that's my flight," Ron said. Samantha walked back into the bedroom with a laundry basket full of whites. She walked over to Ron and gave him a kiss. "You didn't believe me?" "No, I believed you. I was just curious about the flight time." "The flight is at 1 o'clock. I just wanted to get there early and have a few drinks. You know how I feel about flying." "It's no problem," Ron said with a smile. 11 o'clock arrived quickly and uneventfully. Ron and Samantha walked out into the afternoon sun. Ron looked around the neighborhood. He had no idea where he was. The house was completely different, as was the car in the driveway. The square patches of grass in the front of each house that lined the neighborhood street was dark green and well manicured. It was a nice place. Ron felt like it was home. They hopped in the car and went on their way. "Can you tell me how to get to the airport?" "Are you serious?" Samantha asked. "I'm a little foggy up here." Ron pointed to his head. "Too much sleep, I think." "Okay," Samantha said curiously. "Take a ride on I-17 North." Samantha looked at Ron with peculiarity. "Thanks, baby." Ron hadn't said baby to a woman in years. The last woman he said that to was Janie, which was about 2 years before things got really bad. It felt good to be with someone who actually wanted to be with him. He saw the sign for I-17 and took the on-ramp. After getting onto the interstate, he saw a sign for downtown Cleveland. Ohio? Ron thought. Ron wondered how in the world did he ended up in Ohio. The weirdest thing was he remembered a layover at the Cleveland International Airport. He also remembered how pissed off he was because the flight pattern logistics were changed at the last minute, and it added an extra 4 hours to his last flight of the week. It's happening all over again, Ron thought. Except this time I'm a passenger, he whispered to himself. What was that? Samantha asked. Nothing. Samantha closed her eyes and tilted her head back. Wake me up when we get there. Sure. Ron rolled the events of his life before the plane incident, and this different life that he's been living in short spaces of time right now. Nothing was making sense. He couldn't really tell if he was real. Something was off. Time was off. He gripped the steering wheel tightly, and that didn't feel normal either. He looked over at Samantha, and she was visibly older from when they had their dinner. She looked older, but beautifully mature. Ron felt a sudden urge to pray quietly in his head. God? He asked. If you're real, can you help me? This is stupid, he whispered. There is no such thing as God. Yes, there is, a deep, growling voice blurted out. Ah, Ron shouted. He saw Samantha wide awake, looking at him with black, solid eyes. Ron slammed on the brakes and pulled over to the side of the interstate. Ron looked forward and into his rear-view mirror. What happened? Samantha asked. Ron looked over to Samantha as she woke up out of a sleepy stupor. I'm losing it, Ron thought. Are we there? No, I just got a piece of dust in my eye. A piece of dust? Samantha asked. Yeah, it was a big one. Okay, wake me up when we get there. Got it, Ron answered politely. Ron shook his head back and forth and pulled back into the interstate. The airport traffic was light. Ron parked the car in an overnight slot just in case. We are here, he said softly. Samantha opened her eyes and smiled at Ron. Great. Now it's time for drinks, she said. They checked in through touchless security scanner and wound up at Gate 9, walking into the B-Wing Grill. Remember the last time we ate here and you got so sick from the bean burrito? Oh yeah, Ron agreed even though he had no recollection of the incident. So no bean burritos, Samantha said jokingly. I think I can manage, he replied. They sat down at a small table which overlooked the boarding gates. Samantha and Ron were people watching when the waitress walked up and sat menus down on the table. Ron looked up and his heart sank. Janie? He said surprisedly. Yeah, do I know you? Janie asked. Ron just stared in perplexity. Honey, you're okay? Samantha asked. Yeah. Ron paused for a moment. We went to the same high school. Hope's End High? This is my wife, Samantha. She went to Hope's End West. Yeah, that's right, Janie said with a nostalgic look in her eye. How did you end up here in Ohio? Ron asked. Tried my hand as an actress, then ended up divorced with 2 kids. You know, classic failed actress turns divorced housewife. Well, that's not a bad thing. Ron was jumping with happiness inside his heart. To see Janie this way brought joy to his deepest being. He could tell by the look on her face that she was in a miserable hell. Are you ready to order? Janie asked. Yes, we are, Samantha interjected. I will have a turkey club with no tomatoes. And for you? Janie asked Ron. She doesn't even know my name, Ron thought. I will have the big stacked cheeseburger. Did you want curly fries or regular fries? Curly, please. Okay, well, thank you. I'll have your order out to you soon. Thank you, Samantha said with a disingenuous smile. Ron ate his cheeseburger in utter delight. He took random glimpses of Samantha and relished at the idea that his life had become something different than Janie. They boarded the plane and sat down in coach next to the window. Samantha sat window side and Ron sat aisleway. Ron tried to get a look at the pilot from the darkened pathway that led up to the cockpit, but the door was shut and no activity was noticed. A bell chimed on the overhead speaker system and the seatbelt lights blinked on. Attention passengers. Welcome to Flight 369 headed to Boston International. We should have a relatively smooth flight. There are some lingering storm clouds, but our altitude will bring us above the little buggers. Please fasten your seatbelts and prepare for liftoff. And thank you for flying Vector Skies. The plane began to taxi onto the tarmac. It wasn't long before they were on the runway and ready for liftoff. Ron looked over at Samantha, and she was passed out against the window. Ron was beginning to feel nauseated and nervous as the plane began to accelerate. He loved that feeling as a pilot, when your body pressed against the seat with that strong, uncontrollable force of speed from the jet engines. Today, he felt strange about it, uncertain, and with good reason. He had been on this flight before as a pilot, and now this time he is a passenger. Ron knew the flight pattern that Flight 369 was going to take. Why did I get on this plane? He thought. Sweat beads began to build up on his forehead as anxiety started to billow in his stomach. It will be different this time, he whispered. Who's piloting this thing? He stammered. The plane began jarring and shaking. Oh man, here it comes. Ron looked over at Samantha, and she was asleep alongside the window frame. He leaned over and gave her a kiss on the cheek. Ron unbuckled his safety belt and stood up, bracing himself from the movements of the plane. Other passengers were looking around, looking for affirmation that the turbulence was normal. Ron staggered down the low-lit aisle. The little bulbs that lined the floor were dim and hardly noticeable. He made his way to the flight attendant station, and there wasn't anyone there. He banged his fist on the cockpit door violently. I'm a pilot, he yelled out. Open up. The cockpit door unlocked as the plane began to dart down swiftly. The door swung open, and the pilot and co-pilot were missing. Ron sat in the pilot chair and grabbed the controls white-knuckled. The lighting strikes roared through the darkened night, lighting up Ron's face. He pulled up on the controls, and they were locked up. He kept a stern grip and held back tightly on the handles. A bolt of lighting struck the plane, lighting it up again, and the plane disappeared. Rain poured, and thunder blared in the background. The night had become natural and quietly violent. Sir, there seems to be an issue with Coil 9, about 300 miles west of Boston, a young soldier dressed in gray announced. Pull it up on the screen. A gruff-looking scientist with thick black-rimmed glasses chimed out. A live GPS picture of a Tesla coil showed up on an enormous screen. The coil was submerged 3/4 underground, and the top apex that was visible, and was lit up in a ball of moving electricity. The energy levels are beyond valence electrons. I've never seen this before. What are the connecting coils? The scientist asked. The soldier typed on a keyboard. You're not going to believe this. It's too obvious. The scientist smiled. Let me guess, 3 and 6. That's right, sir. I think we figured out dimensional travel, the scientist shouted. Charge up 3 and 6 one more time. The visual from the global satellite panned back as coil 3 and 6 were engaged. A pattern of electric streams lit up in a pattern of Nikola Tesla's vortex mathematics equation. That's it, look, the scientist said. It's beautiful. The electricity streams crossed and turned into themselves in perfect revolutions, in the perfect pattern of 3, 6, 9. Quick, get me a chopper, the scientist blurted out. I want to go into the stream. Ron woke up in a dizzying state. He felt his body rocking back and forth as wind blew his hair around. He quickly realized he was back on the Ferris wheel with Samantha. She was shouting out to the world, laughing and smiling wildly. She looked over at Ron, and his heart filled with love. Hey, what's the matter with you? Samantha yelled out over the excitement in the wind. Remind me, when we're married and have a daughter, she's not allowed to go to college in Boston, Ron shouted. Okay, weirdo, I'll remind you. Ron smiled. Thanks, Anne. And what? Samantha asked. Let's skip the cinnamon rolls and go straight home. I love you, Ronnie, Samantha shouted out into the night. Ron looked up to the starry, clear night and thanked God. At that very moment, a shooting star blazed across the sky, and Ronnie smiled.